We are of the land. You know, we come from the land. But in terms of how those reservations were set aside and given or not given, there is one policy where people were moved from their reservation lands and then brought to cities. And so now it's kind of like, well, what do we do? Where do we go from here? What kind of lands are we talking about in terms of that? People were given bus tickets. Some people aren't even California tribes, and they have lands that are from California that are tribal lands. There are also, when they did the land grabs, they had the native peoples. If they chose to be a citizen of the United States, they would get just their parcel. Then the rest of the reservation was broken up into pieces, and people who were immigrants that were seeking land were given some of those lands free and clear without any money exchange. It was their home. It was part of the Homestead Act. In terms of giving people lands, many more immigrants that were not from this country were given lands, much more than native peoples were allowed to stay on and be given their own lands. If you are living on a smaller parcel of land and you're used to having so much, your hunting would be there, your food supply would be there, the places you harvest your medicine would be there. When you pull that down into a small neighborhood, which rancherias are so much smaller than reservations, and particularly in California, they moved a lot of people not only onto reservations, but kind of off to the lower grade areas of their land. The rancheria sizes are so small that they wouldn't have a lot of those things. Some rancherias are near their river, and so they keep their river, but a lot of times they're off. So if you say, you know, lived in a single dwelling house, that would be considered the reservation, but the park was 3 blocks away, they don't have access to that because that's outside their reservation boundary. So what if your land mass was, you know, how many square miles by square miles, but now you're told you need to stay on this 1 acre and it's just a flat parcel and there's some houses there? Where are you going to have access to those things that are part of your culture, that were part of your livelihood, part of who you are as beings living in that place? You can't access them, which also cuts you off from, say, hunting. And so who's going to take these people out hunting to learn, your grandchildren and so forth, they don't have access to the language of hunting because they are not doing the activity. They don't have access to the to the language of fishing because they're not doing those activities. So when you cut yourself off from your lands, from your livelihood, from those homelands where you're learning all of these other things, it strangles you out of a cultural education based on where you're from. And like myself, as a Nom Tipam person, we are those, Nom is that west part of the earth. So we are on that area, that Pom, that land that represents, you know, A, B, and C. These people represents these high mountain people. These are the fish people. These are the deer people. These families are the hunting people. This is the basket weaving family. And if no one has access to those activities, they cease to exist as human beings. They cease to exist as part of their culture. They cease to exist participating with the land. Instead of being corralled into this little place, they once had access to all of this. And when you have access to your land, you have access to yourself, how to care for the land, how to care for the animals, how to hunt, how to do those things that makes you who you are. And so living on reservations, particularly small rancherias, has cut many people off from who they are as cultural beings.
We lived on these rancherias and reservations, and we had to go off those lands to seek money to exist. We weren't on the so-called federal welfare rolls. We had to work for the white man in order to make it, and we worked for very meager wages. So different situation now. Kids are going to universities. They're getting educated. They have much more in the way of skills to meet the challenge of the mainstream society than their mothers and fathers and grandparents did in the past. Education makes a big difference.
If you are federally recognized, you can utilize all of the policies, the sovereignty, and also policies and laws of your own lands, but also utilize some of the programs that are from the federal government, such as IHS, Indian Health Service. Some tribes also, if you're part of a compact, that is a way to redistribute monies through the gaming tribes in the state of California, and that is only applicable to federally recognized tribes.
They have to do regulations in order to bring a casino to their lands and develop them. It's an opportunity that the tribes have to generate revenue for their government. Much like anybody in the different cities and counties, they look at different revenue sources to take care of their people and their constituents. We do the same.
If you are not federally recognized, you pay for all of your health services, you pay for your school, you pay for everything, and you do not have access to a rancheria or reservation. You know who you are as a tribal individual, but you do not reap any of the benefits, including within your own tribe, having that tribal government and so forth. It doesn't exist. So we have our spiritual practices. We have the ability to know who we are and live in our lands where we choose to, but not to be able to have the benefits that are reserved for federally recognized tribes. But according to the Native peoples at the time of the writing of the treaty, they signed those treaties. So even if the treaty isn't ratified by the government, according to the traditional peoples, they are to be held up to that because they signed those documents. They went to those meetings. So a lot of the peoples thought those were already in the process of, the truth, and the truth is they were not completed as documents. So they are not a usable document. So a lot of people are going back, they're trying to look at the treaties, how can they be a ratified treaty to be made into a living document as opposed to just something of the past.